Welcome to another episode of the Market Makers in Middle East and Africa podcast. I am your host Abrar Hussain. Today I speak to Nader AlBastaki, Managing Director at Dubai Future District Fund. Nader, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Abra.
Nader, you have a very interesting profile, very diverse industries. You have been an entrepreneur. Tell us about your story and how you came and become a Managing Director of Dubai Future District Fund.
It's very kind words. Thank you very much. Well, it's an interesting journey that I came to. It's very hard to put a finger on what it was specifically, but I think it's the plethora of backgrounds that makes it ripe for a VC person, I think. So in my case, I was a founder many times over. So I went through the pains, the sufferings, the highs, the lows, a couple of exits, luckily, many failures, which were a big chunk of my learnings. But those are the ones that I bring back with me, and what not to do is the lessons learned. Banking helped a lot as well, just understanding the macroeconomics, the capital flows of the Middle East Africa region, which we covered in my background as HSBC. After that, I was quite involved with the government sector, helping develop a partnerships division for Dubai Tourism, and then moving on to be part of their data and analytics division, which went through a whole series of development, which I was able to be a big part of. It was interesting, lots of learning, a lot of firsts in the region, which was something to boast about, but also really humbling in terms of the experience of the learning that came out of it. And more recently, I've been quite exposed to strategy through my experience with the Dubai Future Foundation, looking at working very closely with public policy experts, public policy individuals themselves, getting their mindsets, their feedback, what's top of their minds, which really helps. What brought me in basically into the venture capital space is getting those different pieces of understanding the founders, the macroeconomics of everything, but then the specific unlocks that come with understanding partnerships and leveraging partnerships, and really direction setting when it comes to strategy and positioning.
Perfect. Very interesting career again, Nader. Tell us more about Dubai Future District Fund and what is the mission and vision of the fund and how it helps kind of power Dubai's growth by investing in startups and the funds.
At a very high level, it's interesting. It's a great question because I like to talk about it quite a bit because we're very different. We are venture capital, but we're positioned differently. There's a couple of reasons why that is. First of all, we're anchored by two Dubai government entities, the DIFC and the DFF. And in both cases, because they're a government, they don't want another venture capital fund out there. They want something that plugs in gaps, that supports the ecosystem and its growth. So at a very high level, strategically, we are a patient capital provider. What does that mean? We're an evergreen fund, an open-ended fund. When you look at VCs around the world, the most popular model, and in this region, all models are in that model, where they're closed-ended, 10 plus 1 plus 1. So 12-year funds, 10-year funds. And that brings a certain type of behavior, right? So you look at opportunities in the market when you're a closed-ended fund, and you look at where M&A activity is happening, where liquidity is happening, and you work backwards to find deals that you can liquidate at some point in the future. And unfortunately, that means that you want to go for things that the market needs now and you can find exit for. But does that always mean innovation? Does that mean that you're willing to wait and create something that hasn't had liquidity in the past? That's what we've come in to do, basically, is be that patient capital provider for two things that aren't necessarily the ones, the clear winners, the clear opportunities, but ones we're bullish about, that over the long run, we can create a new sector or an opportunity out of. The second layer of what we're trying to achieve as a fund is creating this value creation part of the business. And that's what I've come in to do personally. Is one of my hats is around ecosystem development, which basically means partnerships. Working with the ecosystem, whether it's the regulators, the policymakers, the big operators, the small operators, the ecosystem partners, whether it's incubators, accelerator programs, but working with everyone out there to make sure that we're all co-creating value and making it easier for businesses to do business and grow. On the other side of the spectrum, there is portfolio and portfolio development. So the ones that we end up investing in as entities, what do they need specifically? What are their needs? And then mapping that out to the needs of the industry that we're partnered with and we understand quite well. So that synergy creates a lot of value for both sides. On a portfolio side, that means operational support, strategic direction setting, mapping them, helping them with the network unlocks, whether it's locally, internationally, with different types of entities, and ultimately also helping them push agendas at a policy level, at a regulatory level, because we have, as a fund, both a direct portfolio and an indirect portfolio, a fund-of-fund portfolio. We represent not just the portfolio that we've invested in directly, but the portfolio of the funds that we've invested in who indirectly are part of our portfolio. So when we're coming with this amalgamated issue, it's now a $2 billion, $5 billion issue that we're looking to find a solution to put pressure on the regulator on, rather than the one, maybe $20, $50 million startups problem. So that second part, the value creation part, is very important. The third part I think is very important to mention is we sit in an ecosystem where there are a lot of players. We have when you look at, for example, Sharjah, you think Shara. There's a centralized place where innovation's happening, capital allocators are sitting, universities are sitting, innovation's happening. When you look at Abu Dhabi, we have partners over there like Hub 71 that are consolidating the efforts when it comes to innovation. And in Dubai, we have a lot of different people doing a lot of very amazing things in general. But there isn't one place where you're a new startup, you know exactly where to go. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is be that guiding light.
I mean, you mentioned quite interesting things like creating value once you invest. So, and managing a fund of kind of 1 billion assets under management is not kind of a small feat. How do you make sure that you deploy resources in an effective way and help your companies grow or help create value with them?
So the way that we've structured this is from that evergreen holding strategy, we've created a two-tiered strategy under that. Well, three really. One is a direct investment portfolio, one's a fund-of-funds portfolio. But within the direct, we've created two subsets, a build strategy and a catalyze strategy. What do I mean by that? By build, we mean we're working with pre-seed, seed companies, and that comes with a different series of mindsets, assessment mechanisms that we're looking at, but at the same time, tools that we want to support them with. So we do that to help build up the ecosystem, hence the name build. The next part of our strategy on the direct part is catalyzing, helping the Series A, Series B, and to a certain extent, we follow through until Series C. Those entities grow, develop, and widen their scope of geography and where they are in terms of markets. Then the other side, strategically, we invest in fund of funds. But why is that important? It does a couple of things. Number one, by investing in all the emerging fund managers out of Dubai and the UAE, as well as working with all the incumbents in the marketplace, we're now incentivized as a fund on the direct side to work with the industry as opposed to competing with one another. So we're ultimately all there value creating together rather than protectionist sort of mindset of, I found this deal, I want to take full ownership of it. The idea now is that if there's fund B that's probably an amazing fit to this portfolio company, why don't we ask them to co-invest with us? Because we can both add a lot of value to the startup, or in some cases completely push it another way because we feel that that's the right fund for that specific portfolio. Where we sit, it's an interesting position where we're really working with the ecosystem and incentivized to do that based on the strategy that we've created as a fund and how we're deploying that capital, where we're doing a lot more with it than purely just directly investing in startups. So if you think about the 1 billion that you spoke about, the fund size basically, when you trickle that down into a direct portfolio and a fund of funds portfolio, you think about the multiplier effect that a fund of fund play gives you, as well as a direct, and how the network effects of bringing those two together brings a lot more value also back to the investments that you're making. The Ministry of Economy, for example, announced just last week around the importance of startups to their growth strategy, for example, and the future story of the UAE. So there's not only what's going on within the ecosystem organically, there's also the policymakers that have this on top of their agenda, which is very important, I think, to note.
How do you see technology play when you invest? So is there a very good focus on the technology? And how do you see that changing in coming years?
Great question. And maybe there are two things that come to mind with that question. So number one, it depends on the stage that these startups are at. So very early stage startups, you're looking at the team, the people, and how coachable they are. Because at the end of the day, when you're not out in the market and you haven't proven the fit to your product to the market, there's a lot of quick failures, quick tests that you want to do, and you ultimately have to pivot many times. No one gets it perfect the first time around. So the coachability and the flexibility of the founders is very important when you're looking at earlier stage startups. When you start getting to let's say Series A, Series B, and beyond, you're starting to look at the different series of things. You're starting to look at what are their numbers looking like? What's that traction looking like? Are they looking healthy? Are they growing healthily? What are the barriers to that growth? Is it a sustainable model going forward? How can we make it sustainable? What's that path to sustainability? Or what's that path to capturing a certain market share? So I guess the lens that we look at, depending on the entity, differs based on their stage and ultimately also the type of technology and the opportunity that there is in the marketplace as well.
Now, Nader, we spoke about KSA, UAE, but Middle East and Africa is a very diverse region. It's really big, and as you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities. It's very good from the demographic perspective, young population, but at the same time, it's very diverse, right? And it has its own challenges and opportunities. What strategies do you employ when you cater to these unique requirements and the challenges when you invest?
So, I mean, what we do across the board, I mean, fundamentally as an entity, we have this underlying theme and we only invest in tech. So what's amazing about technology and being an IP mainly investor, because we're a VC at the end of the day, is that innovation and digital innovation can scale out to countries. So there might be specific needs in a country, but ultimately the solutions that you're trying to find are not specific just to one place. You're looking for global solutions, but you're trying to find the right people building those solutions, right? So part of it is how do you go about the strategy of finding the solutions to these global needs, the regional needs, where there's an opportunity to capture, and then finding the right people. And finding the right people, I mean, there are two main ways of doing it, right? One is they somehow come to you because they know that you're the right partner and you position yourself the right way, where they're feeling attracted to you and come to you. Or you constantly are assessing the market, going out there, meeting people, and mapping out who the innovators, the change makers are in the ecosystem, and you target them as a portfolio or potential portfolio that you want to sort of talk to and bring those minds together, basically. Because at the end of the day, it's a two-way discussion, right? So we have to be on board, they have to be on board with us, and it's a marriage. At the end of the day, it's a long-term relationship that you're building with this company, the founders, and the solution that they're building.
Given your engagement with various startups, how do you see public and private partnership can help kind of develop the ecosystem more, and how do you see that can be effective?
What we have and what we're lucky to have in this ecosystem is accessible policymakers and accessible leadership in general. That's exciting because when we talk about innovation, you need that access. You're ideally going into gray spaces, white spaces, places no one's gone before, ideally, if you're an innovator, right? they need to be accessible to enable that to happen. And what do I mean by that? There might not be the right talent pools in your ecosystem or globally even. So how do we start churning the right talent? Having them engaged to try and open up that tab, whether it's to work with academia to create new course materials, so we're creating a pipeline of talent in country, creating sort of incentive models for tax breaks or visa regimes to bring in certain types of talent. That's an interesting part. Capital unlocks, for example. Are there certain debt instruments that will really help a certain type of innovation happen because it's very capex heavy or working capital heavy? For example, the story of Tabi was great because they were able to unlock venture debt as an instrument quite well to enable those receivable books to take place, right? So these instruments would not be there if it wasn't for this holistic ecosystem coming together and working very closely with one another. And that is the great advantage of being in a mid-sized, let's call it, ecosystem. When you're too large, that distance between you and policymaker is extremely large. We're in a unique environment where the market is large enough for you to go out and test your product, have a large enough market to do that initial scaling. But then at the same time, small enough for you to be able to access the leaders and really push the agenda on enabling this innovation to take place on the ground and in that home turf, let's call it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very interesting answer, Nader. And Dubai is a great place to start business, and it's becoming a hub for innovation. And there is a leadership focus and support. What else Dubai offers to startups or to the founders, which is kind of very unique and which can help them scale?
And there are two parts to that question. Maybe I'll break it down into what we're doing as part of the Dubai story, and then what Dubai offers
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah.
And on our part, we are trying to, by design, create a pipeline of talent that's going into the ecosystem. And we're targeting three target audiences. Number one is we're trying to create a pipeline of venture capitalists. Number two, we're trying to create a pipeline of innovators that understand venture capitalists. And number three, we're trying to get advocates and ambassadors to innovation in large corporates and operators. So we created a program called the DFDF Venture Fellowship Program. And this is a program by design created to bring in cohorts of individuals to go into the marketplace with that in mind. So they are people who are either striving to be or part of VCs right now. They are building product, or they are building their own startup right now, or they're part of large operators in the ecosystem. And by bringing them together, they're bringing their best practices, learnings from, and their lenses from their part of that ecosystem and sharing. But ultimately, this is all a win-win for everyone. By incorporating innovation into large corporates or operators, they're gaining from efficiency gains, operational efficiency gains. The venture capitalists and the startups are gaining because they have large contracts now that will lure them in and help them create this growth path for them. So everyone has something to take from this, and that's the story here. We're trying to do it in a very sustainable manner, being the year of sustainability, but we're by design making sure that we're creating equality for opportunity as well. So by design, 50% of the cohort is female and 50% is male. And a big chunk of the reason why is the first two target audiences that we have are very heavily put on the male side of the gender side. So in terms of startups, about don't quote me on this, but the number is around 95% of the founders that are venture-backed in this region are male founders. That's dismal. There needs to be a lot more female founders. That's number one. The venture capitalists on the other side that are pulling the trigger are majoritively male as well. So this is something that we're trying to achieve by having this pipeline of people by design 50-50, because over time, this is what goes into the ecosystem. The other thing that we're doing quite a bit, I actually just came in from the Climate Week at the Museum of the Future, is going around and contributing at events and making sure that there is awareness about what's going on in the ecosystem, where there are opportunities, and the fact that us, whether we're capital providers, there were some policymakers and regulators involved in the forum, for example, amongst others, are actively listening, sharing, and having these dialogues back and forth with the ecosystem. So that's our part. But the wider Dubai story is interesting because, I mean, a lot of people know this, I guess, locally, but the living standards here are great. I mean, a lot of people, I talk to them, they're like, yeah, we had the 6-month plan, a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan. 15 years later, they're still here, and they're like, I'm not moving. The safety aspect of living here, it's one of the safest places in the world. That gives psychological safety for you, your families. You want to live here, you want to work here. And that provides a lot of opportunity for startups to attract talent. If they know they can move here in a place where they're safe, their kids are safe, they can grow, learn, and be in an ecosystem where there are amongst others that are all there to work together towards a better place. It's an exciting place to attract talent and to deploy out of. The second thing is connectivity, and in all forms of the word connectivity, whether it comes to some of the fastest high-speed internet numbers in the world, to airport connectivity, to port connectivity, whether you're manufacturing goods and you want to take it to the world, you have one of the most robust, most efficient port authorities in the world that have nodes in over 80 countries. The airport, the busiest international airport in the world, connected literally everywhere. That is amazing. If you want to manage business, there's the digital part, which is amazing when it comes to the infrastructure, but then the physical part of being able to step foot into the various places you're doing business to manage out of the central node. The other part is what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Economy are doing quite well, is creating these robust trade partnerships with various countries. India is a great example, Serbia is a great example, Korea is another great example, and there's a lot more to come. By having those nodes, we're now able to do a lot more inter-country out of Dubai, where the time zones, are extremely easy to manage. Number two, connectivity is really easy to manage. So that, in tandem with the other 2 points, is interesting. And then the last part, I mean, I alluded to it a little bit, but it's a vibrant community. There's so much happening. It's a conference space. It's a center for MICE activities in general, events, conferences, meetings. This is where it happens because of that centrality, but then also because of the infrastructure when it comes to real estate infrastructure, logistical infrastructure that comes into place. So that in itself creates opportunities, creates people in terms of melting pots coming together over here, which makes it a great place to do business as well.
I think maybe if you want to add another thing is, do you see that raising capital is also easy and there is a lot of capital, chasing good opportunities? I mean, will you think that, this is also a kind of a advantage in Dubai?
Can I give an academic answer to that?
Yeah.
It depends.
It depends, okay.
So it depends really down to the opportunity at hand. I mean, the world's going through a lot of changes right now with interest rate hikes, with inflation. And there was a VC winter for well over a year. But we touched on this briefly before we got on the pod, was that there's an uptick. The most recent data points are showing that that VC winter is coming to an end. That's exciting. So that's number one, is with that coming to mind, if it's happening in the US, it's happening in mature market, it will happen here as well. So that's number one, is there's an uptick in the venture capital space. Number two, with all the stimulus packages that are taking place from the region, there's a lot of excitement in terms of where there are economic activities, there are technology needs, there are innovation needs to enable that economic activity to take place at the scale that it's looking to take place at. So the stimulus packages, whether they're out of Dubai with the D33 stimulus package that came out earlier, or in Abu Dhabi, in Saudi Arabia, amongst others, it's exciting. It's exciting to be here. It's exciting that the fact that capital allocation and capital allocation decision makers are here, with a record in 2021 of family offices moving here, and again in 2022, second only to Australia. If you look at the scale of the size of Australia versus the UAE, of attracting family offices here. Capital allocators are more and more calling the UAE and Dubai home.
Yeah.
And that's exciting when it comes to those discussions, right? But it's a two-sided question, right? So if you have the capital allocators, that's one part of the story. There needs to be a lot more of the supply side.
Yeah.
So if you're building something, this is an exciting place to be. The capital is there, but it's also very smart capital. They didn't make that money out of nothing.
Perfect. You touch base on sustainability, and it's a kind of a growing concern for the people and for the board, for the executives. How do you prioritize startups that kind of are into the sustainability space, and how do you kind of measure sustainability in those startups?
It's interesting you use the word sustainability, because the word sustainability, the first thing that comes to mind is nature and the
Nature.
environment. But sustainability in itself, the word is about continuity. It's about circularity. And that's a big part of our model. At the end of the day, we're not investing in things that have an end in sight. We're not a development bank. We're here to create opportunities, lasting opportunities. We might be patient, but we're doing it in a way where we want to foster that innovation and create a sector. So sustainability is well into our DNA.
And coming to you, Nader, you had again interesting career spanning over entrepreneurship, strategy, different industries. How does you kind of involve and create value with the startups, and how is changing the Dubai Future District Funds kind of investment theme or value creation theme?
So a lot of what we've been doing, and maybe bringing my story into the picture, is on the partnership perspective. This is a very important part to really leverage. And what I mean by that is understanding the needs. And we particularly use a term called needs assessment. So we'd go to different partners, different stakeholders in the ecosystem here, and really do a deep dive, much like a banker would do, much like others would do when they're about to give facilities, for example. We're trying to do the same, but on a tech perspective, and not enough of that is done backwards from the key operators in the marketplace here. And by doing that, we're hoping that this will in turn create more M&A activities, more PE activities, and more incorporation of technologies into these large corporates, because by design we're going out and trying to understand their needs, which then would fuel our portfolio investment strategy, and ultimately that would be that some of our portfolio companies would be addressing those very needs. So maybe looping back into your question is, that hat I had on a partnership perspective is something that I'm trying to really leverage in terms of this value creation flywheel that we're looking to create in tandem with the portfolio development part. That's I guess top of mind. Those are the main things that come to mind. Is this the mapping part, and over time I think bringing in the hat of strategy and positioning and making sure that this whole flywheel effect is by design. How we function as an organization is an important part of creating value for all.
Perfect. Very interesting conversation, Nader. And my last question: what advice will you give to the aspiring entrepreneurs or the startups who want to raise funds or come to Dubai to cater to the wider Middle East and Africa region?
Great question. I love that question because it's a very, very passionate one of mine. What we've been noticing, and we've had a number of chats with the people in the ecosystem on this, is the last number of years, let's say the last 4 or 5 years, has seen a complete shift in terms of where innovation is taking place, who's building it, and what they're striving to build that for. We're seeing a lot more startups and solution building out of this region, not just for this region, but for the world. They're addressing global problems out of this region. They're innovating for a global audience, which means their market is the globe, and their market is not a number of countries within their region, and that's it. And the problem between what I said on the latter part versus the former is when you're creating for the world, you can scale up to the world. But when you're creating for the region, you more or less end up being a small version of a larger pie, A, and B, in most cases, those are copycat models. They're not innovative in any way. So what's exciting me now is we're seeing a lot more of that innovation for the world happening out of this region. It's exciting because we're such a small dot in terms of population relativity to the rest of the world. But we are creating solutions for the rest of the world. We're seeing more and more of that come out of this region, and hopefully a lot more to come. So that's keeping me really excited, and that is more or less my advice back to founders across the board is don't think small, think big. That's how the ecosystem is building itself and moving in terms of direction. So if you're coming to us or anyone on the table that's a capital allocator, we're not interested in a solution for just Dubai, just the UAE, just the region. We want a global solution, and that's what we're looking for more and more each day.
Perfect. Nader, again, pleasure to speak to you, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.